everyone. Today we have Kevin Kaiser, who is an integration coach and just an all-around cool dude who I've had the pleasure of working with. And I thought that he would be an awesome guest to just have on this podcast. And we really talk about finding meaning and finding meaning through common occurrences and just finding meaning on this journey that we're all sharing together. So Kevin, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, you bet. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the kindness of an invitation. I'm really excited to hang out with you both. So I'll give you just a quick snippet of my story, just as a way of introduction. So, like you said, my name is Kevin Kaiser. I've basically done the same thing my entire career, just in different ways. So I'm 48 now, and I divide up my story really into 3 chapters. Chapter 1 was the first 10 years out of college, and I worked in finance. So I was in the financial planning world. I started at a big Wall Street company and then went and worked at a private company that really catered to high net worth families. And I was never really the best at math and doing all the, picking stocks and bonds and that kind of thing. But what I was really good at was helping our clients navigate these periods or pivots of significant change in their life. So after we would go through these, reports about returns and things, they would inevitably start talking about these big questions I had in their life around meaning and purpose. And that's just always been my jam. So I was known as the guy that, was just able to talk to people about meaning and purpose. I did that for about 10 years and then moved from Colorado to Nashville, got involved in entertainment management. So you might say I went from working with rich people to working with rich and famous people who were insecure to the bone and borderline narcissist. And the job was the same. Like on the surface, it was about helping them gain more influence, become more successful, at least the way our culture defines success. But beneath the hood was a lot of unhappiness. Many of them even wanted to be anyone other than themselves. So they were the classic cliche, had all of the things, and they didn't want what they had, And so same kind of thing where I would just guide them through these periods of transition and transformation in their life. And I was on my own journey of exploration and had tried all of the different spiritual modalities. Like you name it, I've tried it. So, breath work, shamanism, sweat lodges, yoga, all of it, energy work. And then I found my way to psychedelics. And it was after having a psychedelic experience that all of the dots really connected for me. And this group that I had had this experience through, they worked with a lot of high profile people. And because they knew my background, they just started matching me up with people who were having these big transcendent experiences and no way of assimilating them, integrating them into their life. And then, so that's how I got into, what you mentioned at the top of the show of integration coaching, which is really just helping people take these transcendent experiences and turn them into transformation, because they're not the same thing. You can have a transcendent experience and your life still be the same. I know people who've had and boast about having dozens, if not hundreds of psychedelic experiences or transcendent experiences, and their life isn't all that much different than it was when I met them. So now most of my work is really devoted to entrepreneurs, founders, men and women who have, climbed the first mountain of life, as the writer David Brooks calls it. They get to the top of the mountain, they realize, wow, I've climbed this mountain, but it's not my mountain. I thought all of these things were supposed to give me a sense of meaning and purpose. I have the money, I have the relationships, all of these things, but they still feel stuck and lost. And so what I do is I help guide people through this process that I call soul rewilding as a way for them to get really clear on what their life's purpose is. So that's what I do. Live in Bend, Oregon, got a daughter in college, living life.
That's awesome. Could you perhaps elaborate on, you've mentioned this soul rewilding and what
Yeah.
that is? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, there are obviously lots of different ways into the topic of spirituality, which I just view as it's the exploration of the big mystery of life. What is the essential? What is our essential reality, and what is the essential nature of reality? And I take the perspective like, and you may have heard this quote a lot. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, "We're not physical beings having spiritual experiences. We are essentially and fundamentally spiritual beings who are having physical experiences." And but we forget our essential nature. We're born into this life, and if you think about little kids, before they learn language, before the adults get to them, what is their nature? Like, what are they like? I mean, try to feel inside of yourself what it must have been like for you, just as an infant looking out on the world. You're just pure presence, just pure awareness. And it's not until the adults get to us and say, "Hey, that's not enough. You're a separate being in this world. And in order to be important, you need to become an astronaut, a firefighter, own a company, those kinds of things." And so this pure presence, this pure awareness, this playful creativity that is who we are, is our essential nature, gets obscured, right? The hardware that is our nervous system, that is our mental emotional system, gets loaded with software, with algorithms that are if this then that. If you're this, then you're good. If you're that, then you're bad. And so we just learn these things over time, and we essentially become domesticated. That soul nature, that essential nature, becomes domesticated. And usually it takes a crisis at some point where we realize, oh, this version of life that we've been told should give us meaning and happiness just doesn't work. And we'll do one of two things. We'll either double down on it. Usually this happens in midlife for most people. It's creeping earlier and earlier these days, but it used to be just a midlife. And people will either double down on what they've been told will make them happy. So they go buy a bigger house, a bigger car, to try to, make more money. But, it's impossible to get enough of something that almost works, doesn't quite work, but it almost works. Or they start looking for a completely new way of life. They seek out psychedelic experiences, spirituality. And so rewilding is essentially this process of returning to our essential nature. And lots of spiritual traditions talk about how to do this, but it all comes down to seeing that you are not who you think you are. You have this idea of who you think you are, and who others think you are, that you've kind of all agreed to. And it's essentially investigating those things, investigating those stories and those beliefs to find out what's really beneath them. And that's really where we start.
That's amazing that something like that in this world exists, and that, you can really see through sort of just like all of the illusion and smoke and mirrors that is just deep conditioning that has been conditioning, in the human species for thousands and thousands of years, and has been
Mm-hmm.
perpetuated for a very long time. And in some ways, the individuality is necessary to survive. But in many ways, I completely understand what you're saying with having an identity wrapped up in who you really think you are, whether it be the job that you have or your role or your status in society. And yeah, for me, the whole the whole I don't know what to call it. I think rat race is probably an unfair term, but
I
whatever
think
it
that's a good
is,
term, though.
sure, you know what I'm talking about. But like this whole competition aspect of society, I remember coming out of college and being super uninterested in all of that, and just like, you know, awakening to, you know, you can't really what are they gonna like put on my grave? You know, like, oh yeah, he, you know, really, you know, made money. Or
Mhm.
like for me when I was in college of like wanting to be a lawyer, like like all of those things like were going through my head. And yeah, we were touching upon finding meaning. And you know, I think what you were talking about is something that we all share. You know, talking about early childhood and being in pure awareness to the environment around you. Everyone, I think, you know, has shared that experience, and I think that's really where we can truly find meaning.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the only experience that we have. If you so, and I think it's really, for me, it's really helpful to delineate between purpose and meaning, because I think we conflate the two, and it can become confusing. So, and here's how I view it. And this has been helpful for me, that when people say, what is the meaning of life? Really what they mean is, what is the purpose of life? What is it for? Because meaning is, you give everything all of the meaning it has for you. And the example I use is, it's like an extrovert and an introvert are both trapped in the middle of Times Square on New Year's Eve. The extrovert is in heaven, the introvert is in hell. Now, they're both experiencing the exact same objective reality, but they're not seeing it as it is. They're experiencing it as they are. They are painting the world with meaning, right? Versus like, so that's meaning. Purpose is, what is it? What is it for? So like, what is the purpose of a cheetah? A cheetah is cheetahing, right? It's on the Serengeti plain. It's simply being itself. It's the truth of its nature, right? It's not wondering how to become a monkey that can climb a tree, or wishing that it can become a giraffe or an elephant. It doesn't even cross its consciousness like us humans, where we think we should be something other than what we are, right? So we're actually seeking our purpose outside of ourselves. And this is another algorithm. This may be the most harmful algorithm of all, which is when I, then I, right? Like a computer algorithm is if this, then that. So when I figure out what work gives me fulfillment, then I will be happy. When I find my soulmate, then I will be fulfilled, right? And it always depends on something that's outside of us. And you know, all we're doing in that process is we're only looking for happiness. And even our search for meaning and our search for purpose. Well, why are you seeking those things? Because you think they will make you happy. You believe and hope they will make you happy. Otherwise, you wouldn't pursue them, right? So it's like, so meaning, you give life all the meaning it has for you. And then like purpose is, why does a thing exist? And, I would say that your purpose is simply you, like being you. We just suffer from a chronic case of mistaken identity. We don't know who we are because we've been told at a really young age who we were supposed to be. And like that is actually the original trauma. I heard Gabor Mate give this really cool definition of trauma recently, where he said, trauma is losing the connection with yourself, your true self. And kids are told, kids feel it's not safe to be themselves, right? Because they have to fit the shoulds and need to be's and all of those kinds of things. And so they create these survival strategies and coping mechanisms to become who they think others tell them they should be, right? and we lose that connection with ourself. And, I draw the connection between that and like the stories of original sin and separation. And like, you could even call it the original trauma. Like, what is the original trauma, if not the losing the connection, seemingly losing the connection with our true nature? And getting back to that is your purpose, from my perspective, rediscovering who you are. We were talking before the show that like there are like two big questions that most of the people come to me with. It's who am I, and what am I here to do? Or what is my purpose? And they're the same. Who I am is my purpose. It's cheetah-ing. A cheetah is a verb and a noun. It's cheetah-ing. And I'm Kevin-ing. I'm human-ing. I just lose sight and forget who I am. And it's really simple too, because all of these voices are telling us who they think they want us to be.
Sure. And it's, it's so coded deeply within us. As you say, the original trauma, it seems to be, this original fear of there being something other than love.
Mhm.
Of, if you do this, then you're not going to be loved, and it creates, a deep fear within us. And most people that I've talked to have experienced some version of that.
Mhm.
And just to reprogram yourself out of that really does take a certain amount of willingness and an awareness of it to even begin with, because sometimes it could be just, so painful and you don't even want to be open and aware of it.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the meaning of life, and um, I was thinking about that. And before I started to learn about shamanism, that was something that was sort of just like a plague in my mind, because like it's just sort of like a loop that just like keeps going around and around and around. I think like I'm getting a mental image of what's the snake that eats its tail? Begins with an A. I forget the exact name of it, but there's a specific name for it. But it's like that whole thing where it's just like sort of a dog chasing its tail of trying to find the meaning of life. And in shamanism, and I'm not saying like that this absolutely is, but from what I have found there, and this may sound, sort of pessimistic, but I don't think it is. I've found that life serves as a grand container that contains everything in it, and that really the meaning that we find are common occurrences that we all share. So we were talking about, you know, um, early childhood trauma of like when you show up and you're just being you and you get told, hey, no, like that's not good enough, or that's inappropriate, or X, Y, and Z. And you got to get that out of you, because if you don't, you're not going to be welcomed within society. And so I see that as sort of the original fear of there just not being any love within that. And I mean, in some cases, it might be described as that nature, but it's something that I toss around like quite often in my mind of, of like, if the universe is made with love, then the thought of there not being love is only a thought within the mind. And, if God is a truly loving force, then there can't be anything other than love. And so then it even perplexes the mind a little bit more of like, well, how could these things that are so traumatic exist?
Yeah.
And for me, I found like even trying to answer that question, I don't get anywhere with it. So it's like I'd
Yeah.
rather just like deal and take care and release the trauma so that it doesn't have to affect me anymore, and then continue just going, on with life without it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. There was this guy, Chuang Tzu, who lived, I don't know, 2,500 years ago or something. He was a Taoist. And he said, he was talking about happiness. And he says, you know, happiness is the absence of the pursuit of happiness. Only unhappy men and women pursue happiness. And Aristotle actually said, like 2,000 years ago, he said, the aim of all actions is happiness. Otherwise, we wouldn't pursue anything, right? Like we're hoping in order to find this sense of well-being, peace, ultimately just like, if you want to say it really simply, it's like, I just want to know that I'm okay and that life is okay. That I'm, you know, the big three things that every human wants: I'm safe, I belong, and I matter, right? Like in Hebrew, there's a word for that, shalom, which means total well-being. You know, it's not balance that we crave, but it's wholeness. This is what Jesus talked about in the Gospels, where he says, blessed are the meek, right? For they shall inherit the earth. In the Beatitudes, every time he says blessed, he's talking about this feeling of wholeness, total, pure well-being. And it has its, it has a very similar, there's a very similar concept in Buddhism, right? In Hinduism, and like all of the isms, right? And they actually all agree on the fundamental nature of reality and the fundamental thing that everybody is seeking. And it's simply this, that there is one reality, and the very nature of our being is that well-being. Well, you could call that source, right? You could call that God, whatever you want to call it. There is only what is. And we are, like, what is in, through, and as us. And the recognition of that in me as my own essential self, my true self, is what everybody is looking for. That's it. Because you can't add anything to it and you can't take anything away from it. You know, I've done a lot of, you know, like I mentioned, I've done a lot of work with people who have worked with psychedelics. And even the word itself, psyche and delos, the two Greek words, it means to make manifest the mind or to reveal the soul. And so I find that the most powerful experiences are when people, they're confronted with these traumas. They're confronted with what happened to them in their life. And not just what happened to them, but the stories that are wrapped around what happened to them. That's actually what trauma is. It's not necessarily, it's not just what happened to you, but it's mostly the story, the narrative that you encase that happening within and you identify with, right? And so they're confronted with these traumas and they realize, oh my gosh, that's just a memory. It's a persistent memory because I've replayed it over and over and over. It's embedded itself in my central nervous system and in my mind, but they realize that it's almost like they're in a prison that's locked from the inside, and the key's been in their pocket the whole time. And then they can unlock it and get out. And that's actually freedom, right? Like freedom from all of that. And that actually is happiness. Now, is it something external to themselves that they went out and got, right? It's like, I'm not happy. In order to be happy, I need to go get this thing. No, it's actually this thing that existed that covered up this awareness that they were okay, right? The essential nature of their being. They were just hypnotized. They were entranced by this thing so much that they just lost sight of who they were. And then once that just evaporates, what remains is their essential self. It's who they actually are. And it goes all the way back to this idea of presence awareness, as being our essential nature. Because the only thing anybody can ever say with total conviction is, I am. I exist. You know, like right now, how do you know you exist? Right now.
The breath.
The breath.
the breath,
Body.
all of my senses, the body.
Body. Yeah, but it's the awareness. It's the experience of those things, right? Like people, and this is where this gets into a really deep conversation with, especially people that are very scientifically minded. They say, well, the mind creates consciousness. The body, the awareness appears within the mind, when it's actually the other way around. The only thing you can ever really prove is that I know, I experience, right? So the body or feelings, I'm experiencing a thought, but that which experiences is not itself a thought. Where are the thoughts you had 2 minutes ago? Feelings, like I have feelings and emotions, but that which experiences the feelings is not itself a feeling or emotion, because it remains, right? So, and it's that pure sense of I exist, I am here. And without that, nothing is experienced, right? It's actually the light that illuminates all experience. And which is why, whenever people have these really big mystical moments, these experiences of unity, or like everything is okay, I'm fine, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my feelings, I don't even think I'm my body, what the hell? It's like, what is that? And the teachers of non-duality say to, like, okay, that is actually the fundamental nature of reality. It's the recognition of that. And then the recognition of our shared reality, right? Like the essence or the source of my existence is the same source of your existence, right? And our recognition of that is what we call love, right? Like there's that whole idea of namaste, that the divinity in me recognizes divinity in you as the same. And the recognition that my essence is the same shared essence with creation, we call that the experience of beauty. And I would say those are the things that everybody is seeking. And you cannot find happiness, joy in any external thing, because those external things are simply going to keep pointing you back to the one who actually experiences all things, right? And what is the nature of that? What is the nature of that essence? It itself is peace. It is well-being. And this is where things like meditation come in really handy, because it's not that you're going somewhere. It's that you're simply recognizing your essential nature, right? It's like the sky becoming so hypnotized with the clouds that are appearing, it thinks it's the clouds. And then when the clouds disappear, the sky remembers, oh, no, I'm the space that all of this stuff is happening in. And that's the most important discovery of our lives.
Yeah,
if you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah. I feel like I'm on the edge of this discovery myself, right? After searching for all of the things outside. I shared with you before we started, I had that question about who am I for a long time, which wasn't really leading me anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then I eventually realized, yeah, I'm trying to define myself, but I'm not exactly definable in words. It's more of like a scent, like just like this, right? Like the awareness of these things I can experience.
Yeah.
And then still going through a process of, all right, so but what am I trying to do with my life? What am I trying to achieve? And then getting to the point of like, yeah, all of these desires or things I want to get or do, like, right, ultimately it's still to have a sensation or a feeling or an awareness of something. And then, yeah, just finally getting to the point, well, right, like if everything is just
awareness,
just right, the awareness or a God or whatever that
Yeah.
A
Because
lot of
people
is.
would then say, well, what's the use? Like, right? Like, so let's make it really simple. Here's the cultural story. The cultural story is um, go out and do things, have experiences, relationships in order to be happy. We know that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. The flip side of that is actually, from my perspective, the truth that everybody's looking for, which is know that you yourself are, like, the very essence of your being is happiness. And you cannot add anything to it. You cannot take anything away from it. So from that place of being okay, now you get to approach life from the perspective of creative play. You're now no longer seeking out experiences, relationships, and things in order to be complete or happy, in order to know who you are. You're doing them simply for the joy of being a creative being. You see the difference? Like,
Yeah.
it's a world of difference. It's like the difference between a candle and the sun, right? Because, like, going out and trying to find happiness and joy and deep meaning through stuff, we all know it doesn't work. We just fooled ourselves into thinking that we're the exception to the rule, right? It's like, I'm going to be the one who, once I get this, that, or the other, I'll be happy.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people seem happy with their stuff, but you never know
Yeah.
what actually is going on inside of somebody.
Totally. And I use happy, but I prefer joy, because we tend to equate happiness with pleasure, because pleasure comes and goes. It's pleasure and pain. What I'm talking about is that, like, that unshakable sense of I'm okay. I don't need anything outside of myself in order to be okay, right? I can be with what is. I don't have to resist life. Doesn't mean I have to like it, right? Because there are plenty of things I don't like. You can still keep your preferences. Like, nobody wants those. Like, nobody will take those away from you. Keep your stuff, like, right? Just don't let your stuff have you, whether that's emotional stuff, stories, physical stuff, relational stories. And then an interesting thing will happen, though, when you begin to see, when you frame life that way, life will start to bring you situations, opportunities to reflect back to you where you still are looking for happiness outside of yourself. I tell people you should go and get good and pissed off and triggered, because if you're on the spiritual path, because that's going to reveal in you stories that you still believe about yourself being a victim, right? Like, this person made me unhappy. Well, no, they didn't. You already had anger inside of you. That situation just triggered something that was already inside of you. And so you start taking this sort of radical responsibility for your life, which isn't fun, by the way, especially at the beginning, because it leaves you no exit. There's no escape hatch. Like, it's all about stripping away what covers up your essential nature. And for me, so Nick, you asked me the process of soul rewilding. So I've narrowed it for me down to three things that I carry people through. I just call them 3 paths, and they're not actual paths, but this is just how I think of it. There is the path beyond mind. And I almost always start people here because we're so identified with our minds, and who we think we are, who we think others think we are. And when I say minds, I'm talking about our mind body. So this includes our emotions, the emotional stories, and things like that. And so it's the path of self-inquiry. It's really questioning the stories that you have about your life and seeing whether or not they are true, and seeing and being really unflinching and honest about the beliefs you have, all of the things that you've accepted, and seeing whether or not they're true. Because what underlies all of those, what's beneath all of those, is the second thing, which is the direct path, like all of those things are covering up this very thing that we've been talking about, which is presence awareness. It's being conscious of now, the present moment. I mean, none of this is rocket science, right? Like people have been talking about this stuff for thousands of years. So it's the direct knowing of who you really are as presence awareness in this moment. It's covered up with thoughts, feelings, and you just begin to evaporate those things and experience yourself, which then frees you for this third path, which I call the pathless path, the pathless path of being, which nobody can tell you how to do that, because it's all about being yourself. Truth, like fearlessly, freely, honestly yourself. But the only way you can get there is by letting go of the ideas of who you think you are and who others think, and who you think others think you are. Like letting go of those, getting grounded in your essential nature. And then from that place, you can then express yourself really however you want. I mean, all of the sages, all the mystics will like whenever followers and students would come to them and say, like, what should I do with my life? They just kind of shrug and say, well, whatever you want, like do whatever you want. Right. It's like, I think it was St. Augustine or Thomas Aquinas who said, like, love God, like love what is, and then do as you will. Because if you know who you are, then you know who everyone else is too, right? Because love is the recognition of our shared being. And then beauty is the recognition of our shared being with creation. And so that will fundamentally change how you create in life and what you create. It's no longer as a way to bolster this egoic self that demands that the world bends to its reality, and it demands life will make it happy, right? And it's like that imaginary self is just that. It's imaginary. It actually doesn't even exist. Which is why, like, I laugh when people talk about ego death. It's like, right? It's like putting out a murder contract on an imaginary friend. Good
Yeah, I know what you mean.
all you have to
Thought
do
of it
is
that
just
way.
see it
That's
for what
really
it is. Yeah, you just have to see it for what it is. But that's the thing. We are either unable at first or unwilling to see what is, like, what is the truth. I've now come to the place where things like reincarnation make sense to me. Quantum physics is actually the thing that really shaped, like, totally revolutionized my spirituality, because once you remove the pesky ideas of space and time and even quantum mechanics, like they've just recently proved, not recently, but in the past 20 years, proven that even quantum mechanics isn't fundamental to the essential reality. Like space and time don't matter. Quantum mechanics actually don't matter either. Donald Hoffman if anybody's interested in learning more about this, there was a podcast between Donald Hoffman and Rupert Spira. That was just really fascinating around this. But, so the way I say it is we're essentially souls that have incarnated in an experiential dimension of existence as a means of experiencing. So game on.
Yeah, it's very poetic and well put. What you're saying, I've actually, it's really interesting that you say that. Like the whole if you go to a guru and you ask the guru, like, what am I gonna do with my life, and they're just like, I don't know. Like, what would you like to do?
Whatever you want.
Yeah, when you were saying that, it was reminding me of Siddhartha and the book by Hermann Hesse, where it's a part of the book where Siddhartha and his friend are hanging out with Gautama, I think the name is. Might be wrong on that, but they were hanging out with the illustrious Buddha, and the illustrious Buddha had much knowledge to share, but he could never really tell Siddhartha, about his own unique path. And so it was when Siddhartha decided to leave that whole group and go on his own path of discovery and really discover, who you really are. And it reminds me of something that I've learned in shamanism, of where you look at every shaman, and it starts just first as every shaman as being their own unique being with their own unique practice, and you understand that they're all unique, therefore we're all the same. And then once I came to that understanding, it just sort of like broadens out to everyone, sort of like within that non-dualistic, or the just paradoxical approach of like, we're all unique beings, therefore we're all the same, we're all unique. That's something we could really find meaning in,
Yeah.
and explore it, and explore our own uniqueness.
Yeah.
And it's tough within a society where you have to go and you have to compete in order to make money for most people, and you're never really given the allowance or the space to be able to find who you are uniquely in that space. And maybe not always, but it's just interesting to hear these common occurrences of what you found, and what these really famous mystics of the past have also found too. And it also reminds me of a quote from Musashi of, you're never going to find anything outside of you, it's all within you. You're never going to get richer outside of you, you're never going to get smarter outside of you.
Mhm.
And the list goes on, and it's all
Yeah.
within you. And it's kind of funny too, because like hearing that is paradoxical, because sometimes you just need somebody to remind you of that.
Yeah.
It's
And it,
you're not gonna
it-
find it, but that's someone else reminding you of that. And it's like,
yeah.
I think that's like the moment the universe kind of like gives you like the wink of like, this is just some like weird place when it's completely filled with paradoxes in which we're just tripping around in.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can feel like very Hallmark cardish, right? Like all the happiness you need is inside of you. It's like, yeah, but I'd like a really nice car and a really nice house. And
I want a
and
boat.
I want a boat. Um, we have all kinds of ideas too around um, like, okay, so let's just kind of go through this. So we all know it doesn't work to like find happiness from your work, right? Relationships, all of these kinds of things. But then, so I worked with this guy who he was very successful on Wall Street, like very successful, did all of the things, had all of the things, and realized that first step is like, okay, this doesn't work. Like materialism doesn't work. So I'm going to go on a spiritual path. And so he traded materialism for what I would consider spiritual materialism. So he decided, I'm going to go find happiness through discovering my purpose, discovering deep meaning through, and he did all of the things too: psychedelics, shamanism, sweat lodges, vision quests, all of the kinds of things. And that didn't work either, because he found that he still wasn't happy. And it didn't change for him until he had an experience where he saw the folly of all of that. He let go of all of it and said, and he had done it all. Like he had set up nonprofits, he was feeding kids, clothing kids, like rescuing people from human trafficking, like all of the things that we would look at and go, oh, like that's real, that's the purpose of life. He was still like unhappy and unfulfilled. And it wasn't until after he came to this place of realizing, oh, I'm actually none of those things. I was doing those things to find out who I am. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But he was seeking not only his identity, but his joy in those things. And it wasn't until he let go of them all that he realized, oh, like whether I do those things or not, even if I have a spirituality, quote, or not, a spiritual practice or not, I'm still me. Like, I'm still okay. I'm accepted. Like you said earlier, like the essence of my being actually is love. And there's nothing you could ever add to it or take away from it. Like in an entire lifetime, like you can actually accomplish nothing and still be perfect, like live a perfect life. It's just I do think that we're all here to express and create and do things, right? Because otherwise, I mean, life is meant to be lived. So, but there is this, I don't know, there is this, especially now because there's so many life coaches and like spiritual guides and they'll say, all you need to do is find your unique genius and then tie your genius to your vocation and then you will be happy. Except most of the people I work with are successful because they learned what their genius was and how to monetize it. And they're still miserable. So it's not that. That doesn't work either. It's not until they realize like their essential nature, who they are, that it's not that they change the rules of the game, but they start playing a different game completely. Which is more of like create life as creative play, living in flow, really.
I'm curious, do you use like specific exercises or tools with the people you work with? How do you help them to come to these or this understanding inside of themselves?
Yeah. It really depends on the person, but I mean, there are a few go-tos. I mean, the ones that help people get out of their thinking mind and into their body. That's really important. Like the feeling self, like playful things, getting them out into the wilderness, getting them moving, dancing, ecstatic dance, breath work, things that just have there's a physiological mechanism where the mind gets a little quieter, right? Putting yourselves in situations where you experience moments of awe, stillness. For me, I live in Bend, Oregon, and I lived in Colorado for a decade. So I love outside. There's just something very contemplative and, meditative about it, but you have to leave your phone at home. So when I work with people, like they have to put their phone away, they have to lock it away. And if you can do this for like 3 days, there's studies around this. They call it the 3-day effect. When you go on vacation, it takes about 3 days for you to feel like you've like shifted gears. Like there's psychological and physiological mechanisms around that. That's totally true. And so if I can get a client out of their regular environment for at least 3 days, 4 days, it's a big help. Things like sweat lodges, psychedelic experiences, like anything that's out of the norm really helps. But if people can't do that, and they also need to build new rhythms, new habits. One of the habits that's very helpful is, meditation or contemplation. So again, nothing new. I mean, the stuff's been around for a long, long time. And also, investigating your thoughts. I guess this happens through meditation, but there's some really challenging teachings around non-duality. Like one of my favorites is a book called I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. And if you've never read this is amazing. Like he didn't write it. They're just transcripts of people asking this dude questions about the nature of life. And he'll say things like, the only problem you have is that you believe you have one. Or your only problem is like you take yourself to be a person. And in reality, there's no such thing as a person. A person is just a bundle of memories and ideas and stories around those ideas, memories, which there's lots of proof for that, and so I'll point them to things that I think will disrupt who they think they are. So for some people, it might be documentaries. Like there's a documentary called Tell Me Who I Am on Netflix, which I highly recommend. It goes a little dark, but it's about these two brothers in the UK. When they're twins, when they're 18, one of them gets involved in a motorcycle accident and loses all of his memories. The only memory he has is that his brother is his brother. He doesn't even recognize his parents. So he goes home, and over the course of many years, his brother, who wasn't involved in the accident, rebuilds all of his memories. It's like, shows him a picture. He's like, tell me about this. Oh yeah, we used to go on vacations in France, and our parents were loving. But you come to find out halfway through the film that none of that is true. That his brother, he and his brother grew up in a very abusive, horrific household. And all of the stories that his brother told him were total fabrications. They were lies. And he did it as a way of protecting him. But he asked the question, he's like, well, if I'm not my memories, what am I? Who am I? And so that's what self-inquiry is all about. I mean, it's really looking hard at these stories that we have about who we think we are and realizing they're all just stories, and we don't even remember them as they happened, right? Because there's actually all kinds of research around this too, that every time you recall a memory, your brain has to essentially reconstruct in real time, in the now, what it recollects. So every time you recall something, you change it. It becomes less and less true each time you recall that memory. So who are you? Right? And so these are the kinds of things, it's like this dialoguing back and forth with people. I mean, that's mostly what I do, is that I point out where they're lying to themselves and where they're not asking truthful questions, and that's how I do it. It's fun.
Yeah, I would imagine so. When it comes to finding meaning and looking at commonalities that we all share, I think we've discussed a few of them, and perhaps we can elaborate on some of them. But one of them is love. Whether it be for a family member, a friend, a child, a pet.
Mm-hmm.
The list goes on and on of things that you could possibly love yourself. That's great if you have achieved that.
Yeah.
We all have a body, we all breathe, we're all breathing right now. And that's something that's a commonality. And I also want to say too, as far as breath work goes, you mentioned something about breath work, and I've been working with Melissa for, I don't know, a few months, or actually, well, thinking back to Blue Morpho now, a few years, but a way, but having breath work become something where you become aware that you have a body. And it's really like all of these practices that really, it shows you compassion. It's like, yep, that person's breathing. Yep, that person has love in their heart. Yep, that person just wants to be happy. And when you see that, that's really where you can make the connections and find meaning with that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's like we, mentioned earlier that, and you said so beautifully about there's a unity, like everything is a unity, but there's diversity within that unity. And it seems like a paradox to the mind. It's a paradox, but like all you have to do is just look at nature to see whether or not that's true. It's kind of like the water cycle. Water evaporates, condenses, become clouds, and then it rains or it snows, and every snowflake is different, right? So they're like individuated snowflakes, but the individual snowflake is part of the snowstorm, which is part of the atmosphere, which is part of the ocean, which is part of the rivers, like all of those things. And like for me, it's becoming more and more simple that love is the awareness that like you're a snowflake and I'm a snowflake, but we're both made of the same water. Right? So like the the source of our existence is the same. And the recognition of that, it is deeply meaningful to me. And it also shifts how I treat people. And it also shifts how I treat, the woods by my house, and taking care of it, because it's all of the same source. And so life it's just becoming simpler and simpler to me, which is why I think all of the sages and teachers say, look, in order to inherit the kingdom, in order to be free, you must become like little children. And so if you think about it, that's what we're all doing anyway. We're kids and we're playing and we're just enjoying life. And then we have to get a life, right? We have to become somebody so that we can save up money and hopefully one day return to be playing. We just happen to call that retirement now. Right?
Yeah, right. That's an interesting way of looking at that. I love that.
Grind through life so that you can get back to playing. Why not get back to playing now? Right? And that is a kind of sacred act of rebellion in a way. Because it's, like you said earlier, that, I don't feel like I have a place to be myself. It's not safe to be myself. Because if I'm myself, will they like me? Will I be an outcast? And we still have that, Paleolithic stuff in our genetics that knows, being an outcast equals death. It's not so today, right? Like you can be outcast from your community and still live. Back then you couldn't. Like you were saber-tooth, lunch, saber-tooth tiger lunch. So, it's just becoming a little simpler for me. And just finding and just realizing that I'm the only person that's painting the world with meaning is me.
Mm. What do you like to do for play?
Everything outside. And my wife and I are going to go mountain biking later. There's just something to me, there's just something about being out in nature that makes me feel more, I just feel more alive. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking to people on Zoom, like during the course of the day. And I often have these moments where I think, man, this is a stupid way to live, in chairs, looking at screens. I mean, it's beautiful. Technology is amazing, but there's nothing like getting outside, digging in the dirt, getting sweaty, moving. So anything outside, spending time with my wife, elemental stuff, making campfires, talking with people. It's just fundamental stuff, just play, creative play. And I feel like in the past couple of years, I've started to apply that to my work more and not take myself so seriously. Which, I mean, that's been one of my big challenges too, because I mean, for whatever reason, the universe has brought me to people that are like really successful, as our culture defines success. And so they're constant reminders that there's always somebody who's doing better than me. Right. And so there's like that, oh, maybe I should do that. Or, when I'll be important when I do that. So it's like this constant reminder of, oh no, I mean, just go play in the sandbox. You can take the sandbox seriously too, by the way. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, when you get focused on life as creative play, you become deeply committed and focused to playing as well as you can. Right. And this is where you shift the game of things like competition, where it's not a zero-sum game, which means in order for me to win, I have to make sure you lose. No, I mean, in our world is coming to a place where we're living the reality that doesn't work. And everything is collapsing because it must, in order for us as a species to evolve to the next level of our capacity, of our potential. Like these old stories just don't work anymore.
Yeah. I want to just say this quick, but then I got a question for you, Melissa. But what you were saying about um, this sort of idea of, in order for me to succeed, I have to go and sabotage you, in this like whole sort of model that we have, and how that's really, like it really seems like that delusionary bubble has just been popped, and that really people are waking up to the reality that, our well-being is dependent upon each other for a lot of things. Sure, there are things, that we can do for ourselves, but, we were talking about happiness and, finding happiness, a lot of that comes from just communicating with other people. Like, you need other people. And I'm not saying that you're not saying that at all. I'm just, my whole point is to really sort of dispel that whole notion of what we were talking about, as far as like, in order for me to succeed, I must sabotage you and be within that like creative sort of like, like not even like, or not creative, excuse me, competition, and like not even like a good competition either, because like that's not a form of competition that's good. Now, I think competition could be something that can be used to really, benefit us, but not that way, not that way at all. But
Yeah.
Melissa, I wanted to sort of mirror that to you. What do you do for play?
I love to be outdoors also. Um, yeah, I like the playground a lot. I get to go all the time because of my children. So we were just doing some cartwheels the other day. Also, the other day we were just hitting some baseballs, which was really fun. I hadn't like hit baseballs in I don't know how many years. I used to play softball. So I like sports. I like exercising as well. I like knitting, but I have an injury, so I can't do that right now. And gardening, that's another one. I'm kind of have a hand injury right now. Drawing and writing. I like reading. I like laughing a lot. I have a lot of fun with Louis, my husband.
That's amazing.
Yeah, playing with my kids.
Yeah. How long have you guys been married?
Moving. How long have we been married?
Mhm.
Since 2011. We've known each other since 2008.
Oh, wow. Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Laughter, like the ability to not take ourselves seriously and play is, man, I mean, it's the only way we've survived. My wife and I have been married 22 years,
Ooh, well
and
Wow.
it got really crunchy for a while when we were like taking ourselves really seriously, you know? So what about you, Nick? How do you play?
I go outside. I like to swim when it's hot outside, get in the river when it's cold outside. I like to get on the mountain and snowboard. I like to learn martial arts. I like to exercise, laugh. I like that one. I'm gonna add that one into my repertoire of things that I like to do for play. Watch comedy, hang out with people. And even too, you're redefining this creative endeavor right now. This is something like that I could play with and have fun. And so like,
Yeah.
you know, having conversations with people that are meaningful.
Yeah.
yeah. I keep
Art.
asking, you talked about this, Kevin. Sorry to interrupt you, Nick.
Oh
Talking
no, sorry.
make your work more fun. I keep asking myself that. I haven't come to the answer yet, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm living the question.
That's amazing. Well, and something you said earlier about defining ourselves, and you said something along the lines of, I'm not sure I'm definable.
Mm,
That I think that that's absolutely true, because people talk about, I'm going to realize my potential. And it was like, how is that even possible? Because you will never totally know yourself, because you can't,
mm,
because you are infinite, like who you are is, first of all, physically changing. Like, just as we've been talking here, like we've been sloughing off millions of cells, and new ones have come online, have been created. And so we're literally a new person all the time. We're always learning, right? It's just when we break out of that, like break the habit of being our conditioned selves, we begin to realize, oh no, we're actually pure potential wrapped in skin and bone. Um, And so then life becomes, I really do think it all just comes down to the life as play. Because I was noticing how you guys, like what your faces looked like, how you held your bodies when you were talking about how you find fun, right? Like, you know, Melissa, you've got a great smile and you kind of sat up and you opened up, and Nick, same kind of thing. Now, because everything is infused with the consciousness and the energy we bring to it, imagine what work would look like if that was the energy we infused it with, right? That it's like, oh no, this is a sandbox. We're going to play. That doesn't mean you can't bring the full faculties of your intellect and like all the things you've learned to figure stuff out and, you know, build cool things like iPhones and rockets. You know, but it's simply because we can. And we're also doing it, you know, to your point, Nick, that no, what I do for myself, I do for all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that I do think that we're, if we don't figure it out ourselves as a society, that like this extreme individualism and independence that has made America what it is, that it doesn't work. I think life is going to force it upon us until we get the message, we get the lesson that there's only one human family, and borders are made up, and all of these systems that we have are made up, and because they're made up, we can make new ones. And if we're to exist, we must. And there are lots of ways to learn, easy ways and hard ways. We just keep picking the hard way.
Yeah, well, we have that rugged individualism.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what people believed, right? That it does take hard work to make something of yourself or to achieve. I think we like taking the hard way.
Yeah. And part of that
let things
has
be
been
easy
true.
and life be full of ease.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like flow. For years and years, I would read the Tao Te Ching and not get it. It's like, what does he mean? The master does nothing and then nothing is left undone. Like, it just baffled me for years. And then it just clicked. I'm like, oh, it's flow state.
Mm.
And it's actually, and that's what really enlightenment is just what people call enlightenment. It's just going into total cooperation with reality. Right? It's like not living life, but letting life live you.
Yeah, I always think of that as like the worst pain, right? Like not accepting what is.
Oh yeah, it's the only pain, really, I think, or the only suffering. Right? There's like physical pain, because somebody might say, "Yeah, I hit my hand with a hammer." Yeah, but like emotional pain and suffering is, yeah, it's just resistance to reality, to what is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just think life should be different than it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're kind of like going back to Nick's point, right? We're constantly told we should be different.
Right.
And we do grow up sometimes, people trying to bend us. So I think it becomes almost natural.
And it's almost always so it makes them feel better. Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, right. Why is anyone ever trying to control somebody? Also, though, going back to a point, you know, we were saying how everyone really is love. I mean, I think they are doing it from a place of love, as confusing as that could be.
Oh yeah. And they're just operating from their own level of conditioning. I mean, I have friends and relatives who are still deeply fundamentalist Christians who, you know, would look at my views, knowing, you know, how I grew up, because I grew up in that. And, you know, would say, Kevin, I mean, if you don't change, like, you will go to hell. And I'm telling you this in love. And I don't doubt that they're telling me that in love, right? That's just like, they see the world through a certain lens. You know, it's kind of like going, you know, like Nick, like going snowboarding and you wear goggles and the goggles are orange tinted. And so you see the snow is orange all day. And then you get to the end of your runs at the end of the day and you take your goggles off. You're like, oh, that's right. The world it's white and the sky is blue, you know?
Yeah.
but you just kind of forget, like you see the world through this lens, and you assume, first of all, it's the right thing that you're saying, it's truth that you're saying, and that everybody else should see it the same way. But that's not reality.
No, no, it is not. And you know what I call that? That's called righteousness. And I don't mean that in like the religious, like, oh, he's a righteous dude kind of way. I mean, like, as far as like, no, that's what I believe is right. And if you don't think that is right, you're wrong. Like, that's what I mean as far as righteousness goes. But
Right.
yeah, that whole thing definitely doesn't work either. And you know what we were talking about too, as far as doing it for yourself so you could do it for everyone else. You know, I totally I love that in the sense of, in order to help somebody else, first you need to be able to help yourself. And so when you look at it like that, you really become a friend to yourself, and it puts you in the position of, you know, helping other people. I was thinking earlier today, something like along the lines of like, we get this narrative that we have to be self-sacrificing. And I mean, look, is there something to that? I think like if it's like in like a war situation and like you sacrifice yourself for your friend or whatever, like that's incredibly noble. But I'm not saying, like, I'm not talking about something like that in with the content of which I'm speaking about. I mean it as like, I don't think we really need to be like self-sacrificing as far as like, I'm going to give up what I like to do in order for me to be something else. I think that's where we get in trouble a lot and really lose meaning, you know, within ourselves and our journey
Yeah.
that we have through this life. And when something you said reminded me of that, of just like, you have to be capable of, you know, helping yourself in order to be able to then help other people.
Yeah. One of the hardest things for everybody, almost everybody that I've ever talked to, is self-love. I mean, like mostly because this goes back to when we were kids, you know, like I'm a short guy, 5'6". I was always the shortest kid in my class. So I got bullied,
Me too.
got picked on. And so that created, even now, you know, I have, like when we talk about like this part of me feels like this, like it is almost like we have different versions of ourselves inside of us that are embodied because they were so reinforced, you know, with like the emotional charge of these memories, of, oh yeah, I'm not as good as that person. And I now have the residue of that is still in me. Those things still come up. I'm not fooled by them anymore. I know how to process them, which is an important thing to remember, is like, just because you know these things, you understand these things, doesn't mean that in your nervous system, those things won't continue to arise. Because often people will say, look, I had it and then I lost it. I was like, no, you didn't lose it. Like, you're fully aware that you're not what happened to you, and you're not the story about what happened to you. But your body doesn't know that. It's still in there, right? And you'll just continue to work that out until you'll realize one day it's like, oh, like I don't think about that stuff anymore. But it all comes down to self-love, because you're exactly right. You cannot give others what you don't have. And we're so hard on ourselves. We say things to ourselves that we would never say out loud to somebody else. And, you know, and we get out of integrity in that. And so the first thing is just learning to cut yourself some slack, you know, at least as much as you cut other people, and, you know, more, knowing that you can't give others what you don't have. Yeah. But that's, I mean, almost everybody I've ever talked to, like, that's their biggest thing. Yeah. I'm not good enough, which is, I think ultimately there are two big lies upon which everything else is built. I am not enough, and there is not enough.
Mm.
So inadequacy, which is shame, right? There's something wrong with me. I'm not enough, and there is not enough. Lack, scarcity. And from both of those things, all suffering is created, because you will always act out of fear instead of love.
I gotta let that one sink in.
Yeah, me too. I was doing breath work today actually, and I did come across like the thought inside, or like, I don't think it was a thought. It was like the feeling in my body that I don't trust that I am like inherently, like my inherent goodness.
Yeah.
And like my adult self is like, well, clearly that's not true. Like clearly I am inherently good. Like clearly everything that exists is
Yeah.
inherently good. But yeah, like somewhere in the body is that, just like you're
Yeah.
talking about, is that pocket of whatever that somehow, somewhere got that
Totally.
message.
I think it's just we're born with it. I do think that it's epigenetic, that it is actually within the genetic structure of humanity. I think this is what religions call original sin, the original trauma. It's the separation. And those two things, I am not enough and there is not enough. Like you can actually even say there's only one. I am not enough, because there's not enough because I am not enough, right?
Mhm.
Like God cannot be trusted to take care of me. The universe cannot be trusted to take care of me. Why? Because I'm not enough. If I were just good enough, I will get my needs met. I will find love. I will whatever, right? So ultimately, it really does come down to there's something wrong with me. I'm not lovable, and so what the mind does is it will seek out and accrue evidence to prove that story. And it's just not true.
I really like what you said about it takes time to really sort of sort these things out. And, just
Mhm.
because like just because like you've had like one experience where you've become aware of that, or you've become aware of that, and then it becomes part and parcel of letting these things go and releasing them as they come up. And it could
Yeah.
be, a million step journey. It could be, it takes however long it takes really for you to release all of that.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to say, like, if there's anyone listening to this who resonates with that, of like, I've been doing the spiritual work and like I still maybe have these thoughts. Well, I mean, I can only speak for me. I know I've I definitely have had negative thoughts about myself, or like even like cursing out the traffic this morning because it made me late for work or
Yeah.
something like that. And it's about becoming aware of it. And I think when you become aware of it, you know,
Yeah.
that's really when you could start doing something about it, even if that's just, being
Yeah.
aware of it.
Yeah. And and I'll tell you, the one thing that has been most helpful to me is rather than identifying as the mind, just recognize. And this is all you have to do, is just recognize that, like when you were cussing out the traffic, like that feeling of anger. Are you angry right now?
No.
The anger came and went. You did not come and go. So and that's all you have to do, is just keep coming back. Just keep coming back to the recognition that, oh, these feelings, they come and go. I do not come and go. These thoughts, they come and go. I don't come and go. Like, Buddhism calls it the witness or the observer consciousness. But that creates just enough space where you can begin to like free yourself and work productively, right? Because most people are it's almost like we're wearing a mask and it's so tight on our face that we can't quite peel it off, right? But when you can take off the mask and look at it and go, oh, like I'm what's underneath that mask. The mask comes and goes, but I don't. That is really the start to freedom. And just to like cut yourself some slack, because I'm 48. I've got decades of conditioning, like decades. And that first 20 years was like an accelerated postgraduate course in I'm not enough, there isn't enough. everywhere I turned, you know, there were 5 to 10,000 marketing messages every day, everywhere that I looked, that said, you suck. You could be cooler if you buy our jeans, you know, or if you go on this vacation or had this car or whatever it was. Right. And so just know that, like, the system, our entire system is built upon the need for us to continue consuming. And the best way to get people to consume is to motivate them through shame and fear. And so trillions of dollars have been spent on that over the course of our collective lifetimes, to reinforce those stories of you're not enough and there isn't enough. So you better get in there and get yours. Right. And so once you recognize those things, you no longer have to buy into them. You can see them for what they are.
Exactly. And we don't have to buy in to the delusion or this illusion, this like smoke and mirror game that, you know, marketers play of, you know, you're not enough, buy my shit type of thing. And perhaps, you know, we were talking about like, how could that come from like a loving, how is that love? I don't get it. But, you know, maybe in there, maybe it's just like there's a disconnect there, and that maybe that from their position, they don't think that they're enough and that there will never be enough, and that if they can convince other people to like get their things and buy their things, that then, you know, they'll be enough for having it, and then they'll be enough for, you know, having cut that paycheck from marketed those things. And yeah,
It's
wild world.
ironic. It's kind of ironic that, like, in the Declaration of Independence, which is about freedom, like one of the main things in there is, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Getting back to what Chuang Tzu said, happiness is the absence of the pursuit of happiness. Happiness appears when seeking ceases. And so, like, our entire society is built on perpetuating the pursuit. It's like, you know, it's like the bar. You go to a bar and on the side of the building, it says free beer tomorrow. And you walk in, you say, where's the free beer? And like, come back tomorrow. And so you come back tomorrow. I'll take my free beer now. No, it's tomorrow. Free beer tomorrow. Right? Like, it's always tomorrow. It's never now. Yeah. So it's just recognizing that. And then once you recognize that, you're no longer fooled by it, right? It's an illusion, but the illusion of what's happening is it's real. It's like going to a magic show and seeing an illusion do a trick on stage. And then let's say your friend is a magician too, and they lean over and tell you how the trick is done. Well, you can still enjoy the trick. Like, you can still see what's happening. You're just not fooled by it anymore. You understand how it works. And that's all spiritual awakening is. It's seeing the illusion, which is very real. Like, stuff is really happening. It's just not what you think is happening. And then once you see that, then you can make different choices and live differently.
Yeah, it's similar to what you were talking about when you're witnessing the thoughts of the anger or the yelling at the people in the traffic. You're just witnessing all that stuff. And then I think that's too where all that self-love comes in, right?
Yeah.
Patience and the kindness with yourself, or it taking so long, or it taking too long, or having to remind yourself again and again and again and again.
Yeah. How often I've started doing this lately, and just like closing my eyes and like putting my hands on my heart and saying, Kaiser, I just love myself. Like, I am a cool dude. Like, I am a wonderful human being. I'm a great dad. And it feels like it started to feel wrong. Like, oh no, this is like, you know, being prideful, but no, not at all. It's the opposite of that. Like, it really is, you know, and I'd encourage everybody to do that. I mean, as soon as you finish listening to this, just sit there wherever you are for 2 minutes and just feel genuine love for yourself and gratitude for yourself, and just the the very fact that you are alive, like the odds of that are so astronomical
Yeah.
that it is,
Probability of being born.
it's basically zero.
Yeah.
And so your existence, the cause of your existence, is the entire universe. Like the entire universe had to come into existence and align in an infinite number of ways in order for you to be listening to this.
Yeah, like everything had to happen, right? Just exactly so
Exactly.
for us to even be here today chatting.
Exactly. So I have a right to be here. You have a right to be here, just by the very nature of our being. Everything else is icing on the cake.
I think that's the miracle of life.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how could
we're
you
all
and how
here.
could you not be stoked by that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, it's hard not to be, you know.
Like you needed to, and you definitely need to be reminding yourself every day, I think.
Yeah.
Because there's so much out there, just like we're talking about, Nick, referencing that is kind of telling you otherwise.
Yeah. And those voices are very loud, they're
Yeah.
very persistent, and they have an agenda. So have one for yourself. You know, this is, you know, I say, you know, you being yourself is an act of sacred rebellion against the, you know, the systems and the institutions and, you know, those cultural agendas that are so embedded in our reality that we don't even notice them anymore. Like the guy who lives, you know, next to the airport, who doesn't hear the jets anymore. You've just grown so used to the background noise, which is deafening, but you just don't hear it anymore. And so, yeah, so you have to love yourself and advocate for yourself too, from within. It's the only game in town.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
I'll
like
agree.
sorry, Melissa, what were you saying?
Oh no, I was saying I agree with that. That's
I was
the
gonna
I found for myself.
I was gonna say another practice too that I've learned is to just tap over your heart and say I love myself and just keep repeating that. And the purpose of the repetition is to get your mind to actually listen to what you're saying and to know that you are giving yourself love and just, you know, making friends with yourself.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And on that beautiful note, I'm going to thank you, Kevin, for being here with us today. I learned so much from you, and really it was such a pleasure to listen to and absorb all of your wisdom today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been really fun. So we'll have
Yeah.
to hopefully do it again. That'd be
Yeah,
fun.
Yeah, that
absolutely.
would be amazing. That would be so amazing. I
Yeah, I want
also,
to say thank you, Kevin, too, for coming on. This is a real pleasure getting to speak with you on this
yeah,
platform.
yeah.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I want to thank everyone who's listening. And if you enjoyed this, I would love if you would subscribe to our podcast. That way you can be notified next time we release an episode. All right, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
See you later, guys.